Today I'm going to be sharing with you the best ever vanilla cake recipe. Today I'm going to be sharing with you the best ever vanilla cake recipe. It's nice and light and fluffy. It's golden on the outside. And then I like to stack this cake so that we have nice even layers of vanilla cake sandwiched in between my famous vanilla buttercream. We're gonna start off by greasing 2 pans. For this recipe, I'm going to be using 2 8-inch pans. You can grease the pans with butter, but I like to cheat. I just use any kind of neutral oil spray. So I'm just gonna spray the bottom there and then all around the sides. Now I'm gonna cut a little bit of baking paper. The secret I have found is that you don't need to line the whole cake tin. It's just a little square that you need. And this just makes sure that when you pop it out, the center where it's like nice and moist is not going to get stuck to the center of the pan. So we're going for something like this. It doesn't have to be perfect because this definitely is not. Today I am using a stand mixer. I find a stand mixer is a lot easier when you are making a cake batter, but you can also use a hand mixer. It'll do just the same job. We're gonna start off with our butter. I always use unsalted butter in baking. So when I add the salt in this recipe, I decide how much that I add in. So I've got my unsalted butter here that we're gonna pop in the bowl. The sugar, I like to use caster sugar because it's nice and fine. And then just like you do when you make any cake, the first step is always to cream the butter and the sugar. So we're gonna pop that on the mixer on low speed first so that it doesn't fly everywhere. And then slowly just increase the speed so that it whips the butter and the sugar together. Okay, so what we're going for is this nice creamy texture, butter and sugar. This recipe uses 4 large eggs. It's really important that whenever you read a recipe, you check the size of the eggs. They're all different measurements. So when we use a large egg, we want to go for 4 of these nice big ones. Normally in the bakery, I go a little bit rogue and I just go straight into the bowl, but just in case we get any shellage, I'm gonna crack these beforehand. I was so confident with that egg too. Ah, it's okay, we can save him. I was trying to be fancy. Oh, no. How to crack an egg? With one hand. Did I just save myself and rectify my career? Thank you. 4 eggs, nice and low and slow. So you have the mixer going, but only on the first setting. Add those one at a time. So the importance of not over mixing a cake is so that we don't whip too much air into the batter. Inside the oven, it will rise too quickly, and what happens when a cake rises too quickly is that it falls, and we don't want the cake to sink. If you're wondering, maybe I could just throw it all in. It does help if you follow the instructions, especially when you're making cake, so that we don't put too much air into that mixture. I'm gonna scrape down the sides of the bowl just to make sure that I get all of that butter. It does tend to stick to the bottom of the bowl, so we wanna make sure that we don't end up with big clumps of butter once we've added all of the dry ingredients. And then I'm just gonna put that back on low speed for a little mix. So the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to take my plain flour and then I'm going to add my raising agents. I'm using both baking powder and bicarbonate of soda. And before they go into this mixture, I want to just get like a fork, anything is fine, just to mix that together so that it is evenly distributed before it goes into the cake. So in quite a lot of cake recipes, especially for vanilla cake recipes, buttermilk is a really great wet addition to the batter. So if you don't have buttermilk at home in your fridge, it's really easy to make yourself at home. We're just going to use regular milk. I like to use a full fat milk, and then just like a lemon juice, or you can also use a white vinegar for that acidity, which is going to curdle the regular milk and make it like the consistency of buttermilk, which is nice and thick. Pop that onto the scales. And then I'm gonna add in the lemon juice. You want to make sure that your milk is at room temperature. Then I'm gonna use that same fork just to mix it around to allow the milk to curdle. So you can see there it's becoming a much more thicker, curdled consistency. Next up, we are going to alternate between the dry and the wet. This is again another one of those measures to make sure that as you add each of the ingredients, you're not adding too much air as you beat each ingredient in. So we're just gonna go nice and low and slow, a third of the dry, a third of the wet, and keep going until we have used all of those ingredients. Okay, I'm gonna scrape down the sides of the bowl just to be safe. Now for our last two ingredients, I'm going to add a little bit of salt to taste, and then of course our vanilla extract. Nice and low and slow. Okay, this recipe does use a generous amount of vanilla extract, but that's because we really want that vanilla flavor to come through. As good as stand mixers are, you do tend to get a little bit catching on the bottom of the bowl. So I always just make sure to give that a little scrape and make sure there's not a whole heap of creamed butter and sugar stuck to the bottom of the bowl. And then we have this nice and light and fluffy batter. And now we're just going to add that into our prepared cake pans. I've got them all greased, ready to go. In the bakery, when we bake cakes, we actually measure every single cake to make sure that it's exactly the same and uniform every time. You can eyeball it. If you guys weren't watching, I would probably just eyeball it. I'm gonna measure them because the thing about measuring is you get that accuracy and consistency every time. So when they go in the oven, if they're exactly the same weight each cake, they're going to bake exactly the same, assuming that there's no hot spots in your oven. So it's just like that kind of safety net to make sure that you get the exact same size for those cakes. All right, so I'm just gonna spread that one out to the sides of the cake pan and then grab a tea towel. This is just so that when I tap the cake pans on the countertop, my nice marble countertop, it doesn't make a massive bang. So you can also just give them a little tap so that they spread out evenly in the pan. And now they're ready to bake. These are going in at 170 degrees Celsius for about 24 to 26 minutes. At 24 minutes, check them, see how they're going in case your oven is a little bit hotter. And then make sure you just stick a skewer into the cake to see that it is baked in the center, and then you'll know once it's done. All right, now it's time to make our buttercream. I am known for using a very different ratio of buttercream. The thing is, you can change this recipe. That's the best part about recipes and baking. You can take a recipe as like a base to start off with, and if it doesn't suit your flavor profile, you can just change it. So for my recipe, I like to use a lot of butter, unsalted always. A typical American buttercream uses a double ratio of icing sugar to butter, which is fine, you can do that too. So I'm just gonna place that on the mixer with the paddle attachment. The next thing that's really important to do is to sift our icing sugar, otherwise you're gonna get big clumps of icing sugar. See if I can do this without making a mess. Can I please have a spoon? Now nice and low and slow, I'm gonna leave the mixer running and then just add the icing sugar. It's probably obvious why you don't want to do this on a high-speed setting, but people have done it before, myself included. So just nice and slow so that that doesn't blow up in your face. And then once everything is incorporated, we're gonna turn that speed up a few notches so that we get that really nice glossy buttercream that we are known for in the bakery. That is sufficiently whipped. But just to make sure, I will always give it a scrape around the sides and especially down that bottom. Okay, the last thing I want to add is some vanilla extract so that we bring out those really nice, strong vanilla flavor in the buttercream as well as the cake. This recipe is great if you don't want a really, really sweet buttercream. Like an American buttercream is really, really sweet. Also really tasty, but I find this one balances with the cake a little bit better. Okay, now that we've got our cakes out of the oven, it's really important, I cannot say how important it is, to make sure that these are completely cool before you add your icing. It might be obvious to some people, but to some people maybe not, that when you add buttercream to a cake that is warm, it is going to end up a complete mess. So we want to make sure that they are completely cold to touch. And then I'm going to just place the first cake on a cake board. This is a 10-inch cake board. So you always want to use the next size up. So for an 8-inch cake, you'll need a 10-inch board so that you have the space all around the sides, so that when you are icing that cake and decorating that cake, that you've got lots of room to move with. And then once you place the cake in the fridge and take it to its destination, it can safely go and transport without being falling up all over the sides. So I'm going to run you through a basic cake stacking today, but if you do want to check out my cake decorating masterclass, in that video I do give a lot more instruction and ideas to different ways that you can stack and decorate these cakes. But for today we'll just keep it simple. So I'm going to hold the top of that cake with one hand so that I've got lots of control, and then I'm going to use my serrated knife. Really important to use a serrated, like a bread knife, so that it cuts nice and easily and glides straight into that cake. I'm going to be placing the serrated knife right in the center so that I've got an even cut. And then I'm just gonna go down at eye level to make sure that it's in the center. And then all I wanna do is keep that knife nice and steady while I spin the cake turntable. So actually most of the action is coming out of that left hand, or the opposite if you're left-handed, but I've got the most control in that side. And then I'm just keeping that knife nice and still and steady as it glides through. And then once I've cut all the way around the cake, I'm going to let it glide through into the center, but still keeping it nice and level. We've got cake crumbs going everywhere, don't worry, we'll deal with those later. And then we have a perfectly cut cake. I'm gonna play it safe and take that one out so that I've got a good handle on that one. There we have it, perfect layers. And this one, because we've already got our base on the cake board, we can just go straight onto the turntable. Same thing, using one hand, your less dominant hand to hold the cake, and then your more dominant hand is controlling that knife that's just evenly cutting through the cake. And now we have 4 layers. You can also add a cake soak. So before you're adding the buttercream on top of those cake layers, you can add what is called a cake soak, which is equal parts sugar, white sugar, and hot water so that it makes a nice sugar syrup. I'm not gonna do one today because this is a great way to extend the shelf life of the cakes. But because I am making this cake today and eating this cake today, I'm just gonna skip straight over that step. So I've got a nice even layer of buttercream in between each cake layer. And then I'm using this offset spatula just to evenly distribute and push out that buttercream all the way out to the sides. So I like to use the tops of the cakes because they rise a little bit in the oven. I'm gonna place that one on top. And then this nice bottom cake from my second cake, I'm gonna place on the top of the cake because it's perfectly even on top and there's no crumbs. Same process every time. I'm gonna place the crumbs straight face down so that less of those go all over my offset spatula. And then I'm gonna get that nice even bottom layer right onto the top so that we've got a perfectly flat surface on the top to work with. All right, now it's time to work on our crumb coat. So I'm just going to push the same thing, push the buttercream out to the sides, but this time I don't want a nice big layer on the top because there's no more cake going on top. So I'm just gonna scrape it right down till I start to see the cake. And then you'll see all of that excess buttercream is pushing out to the sides of the cake, and I'm gonna work that down the walls of the cake. It's really handy to lean over to the side so that you get a nice strong angle on that cake. And that is our crumb coat. Okay, remember this guy from Baking Essentials? We are going to use this on the sides of the cake just to scrape off any excess. And one thing you don't want to do is to scrape that excess buttercream straight back into your clean buttercream. So we want to have another bowl, preferably a clean one. And then any of those little crumbs that we've just scraped off will stay off to the side. So there you have the completed crumb coated cake. So now we pop this one in the fridge so that if you are decorating your cake, you can take it out after, let's say, an hour, maybe 2 hours. It's nice and firm and ready. So then when you add the final layer of buttercream and decorating of the cake, all those crumbs are trapped inside and they're not gonna come out and, you know, speckle on the cake. So that is the crumb coated cake, and now it's time to make it look pretty. So I'm just gonna add some more buttercream to the external parts of the cake. There's also another video on my channel which is Cake Decorating 101. And so if you check that out, I will walk you through lots of different ways to decorate your cake. But for now, I'm just gonna add this buttercream to the exterior of the cake. And then again, just spreading it out to the sides. I don't wanna go too close to the top. And then I'm going to spread that buttercream down the sides. You can also leave your cake naked. You don't even have to add this external layer of buttercream. Okay, same process. We're just gonna grab the flat cake scraper, and then I'm just gonna take the excess off these sides so that I don't wipe them all over the board. And then nice and straight and flat against the side of the cake, just scraping off the last little bit of those excess buttercream. And then nice and gently just pull away so that you don't have a nice big line, and then pulling in the sides of the cake. You can leave it like really rustic, or you can also add like a little swirl just by scraping from the center out to the sides. Okay, now we're gonna cut the cake with a straight edge knife and see those perfectly even layers. Just straight in the center and then all the way down. Pressure. Yes, that looks so good. So you've got 4 layers of cake sandwiched with BROOKI's famous buttercream. This is the perfectly moist vanilla